Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started shortly. I'm just letting folks get a little breather since the last great presentation, and we'll get started in about 2 minutes. Thank you for joining us. And if you could enter your name and organization in the chat, that would be awesome. Thanks.
I see we have Anson Green with us. Anson, are you simultaneously in all 3 sessions? Because I bet you are. Yes, he is.
Okay, I am going to stop sharing and welcome everyone to our panel. Thank you. I know it's getting to be after lunch for folks on the East Coast, and folks on the West Coast, it's getting to be lunch. So it's not quite the ideal time. So I appreciate you spending this hour with us. And I know there's some other amazing panels going on at the same time. So thank you for joining us for this important discussion. I'm going to have a couple poll questions queued up, and I'm going to launch a couple questions to get to know our audience a little bit better, understand kind of your level of sophistication, which I imagine this is an extremely sophisticated audience, but we don't want to bore anyone. So I'm going to launch the first poll question while we're waiting to get started to see kind of what organizations are represented here. And then I'll share the results shortly. While folks are weighing in with their answers to their questions, share a little bit about myself. I'm Emily Foster. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Engagement at the National Immigration Forum. I joined the forum about a year ago. Before that, though, all my experience was in the corporate world. I actually has been with Cummins, mainly known as an engine manufacturer, but they also make kind of related components. And I helped start their government affairs office in 2001. So I was with them for a little over 18 years. And I was their lead lobbyist on immigration and workforce development policies at the time. Before Cummins, though, I was in the pharmaceutical industry. Started my career at the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, and then was with GlaxoSmithKline briefly before joining Cummins. But grateful to be with the forum at this time. A little bit about the forum. Started in 1982. It's a nonprofit bipartisan advocacy or nonpartisan advocacy organization, and we advocate for the value of immigration to our nation and contributing to a richer, more vibrant America. And we do that through a very inclusive approach that engages many different constituencies, certainly including business, but also faith, national security, and law enforcement. As I mentioned, I run the business engagement work, and we work with companies in a couple of different ways. One is we actually have what we call a corporate roundtable, which is Fortune 500 companies that get together on a quarterly basis to certainly engage on federal policy, but also research and immigrant inclusion programs. And we partner with employers to offer a couple of programs. One is Citizenship Services, which is remote citizenship application portal. And we couple that with vetted, trusted legal review. And so it's a way for companies to offer that benefit their employees to help facilitate them getting that important citizenship status. And then also we offer English language training, which is contextualized English language training. We have a hybrid blended approach. 60% is through online gamified modules. 40% is through live instruction taught by instructors with accredited community colleges. So we very important partners for us in that work. And so that's a little bit about the forum, but we're here today to talk about how companies and adult education providers can work better to access WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. While it's a solid foundation and it was really groundbreaking when it was passed in 2014, there's always opportunities for improvement, and that legislation is up for reauthorization. And we think there's opportunities to improve it to serve employers and make it easier for employers to access funding through that program, but also to better serve immigrant workers. And so we heard from our corporate roundtable members that was a concern and they wanted to engage in this area because it's a nice intersection of workforce development and immigration policy. So we formed a working group to get their input on what recommendations could be made to improve that. And so that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. But everybody in this call knows that adult education providers can't do it alone. Government can't do it alone. We really do need employers at the table as well and kind of facilitate those public-private partnerships that are really important in order to ensure that we're best able to serve the workers that need these services. So I'm going to pause there and give you the results of the folks that are on this call. So most of it's adult education providers, got 52% there, 11% with nonprofits, 4% business, 2% with labor union, and 31% other organizations. So thank you all for submitting that so that myself and my panelists know a little bit better about, I can actually share that. So know a little bit better about who's on the call. And so given the intersection of the employers and adult education providers and immigrant advocacies, that's why this panel is made up of 3 such representatives. I'm very, very excited to introduce you to the panel so we can get started with the questions and you don't have to hear from me anymore. I'm going to start with Judy OMalley. Judy is with World Education Services. She is a senior technical advisor in the U.S. Division and National College Transition Network. She supports federal and state adult education initiatives with a focus on integrated education and training, adult career pathways, and WIOA policy and performance accountability. She has 35 years experience, which I think is impossible, Judy, but that's what it says. An adult education and workforce development as a practitioner, local and state administrator, and national policy expert. So thank you, Judy, for joining us. And Judy is also currently serves as president of the National Coalition for Literacy. Next, we have Dane Lynn. Thank you, Dane, for joining us. Dane is the Vice President, Immigration and Workforce and Education for the Business Roundtable. And I'll let Dane talk a little bit about who the Business Roundtable is, but his previous experience before joining the BRT is he was with the College Board and he was with the National Governors Association. And actually, while at the Governors Association is when he helped develop the Common Core standards, which all of us know so well and has been adopted in 46 states. But Dane actually started his career as a teacher and principal with schools in West Virginia So thank you, Dane, and we appreciate your breadth of experience for this panel. And then last but not least, my colleague, Dan Costin. Dan is the Assistant Vice President of Policy and Advocacy here at the National Immigration Forum. His portfolio includes immigrants in the workforce, immigrants in the military, and naturalization. Before joining the forum in June of 2017, he worked at World Relief as our Senior Vice President of U.S. Programs. And before that, he was with Christoffel Blind Mission, hopefully I said that right, as Regional Advisor in Africa. And he was born in Taipei, Taiwan. So thank you all for joining us. I'm looking forward to a great conversation. For those that are watching, we don't have slides. It's just going to be a conversation, but I hope everyone will weigh in with questions. We will. It's the easiest to include your questions in the Q&A section, but we'll also be trying to monitor the chat in case anybody puts questions there as well. And so with that, we're going to get started. I'd like all the panelists to kind of help level set the audience, provide a little bit more detail on your organization and how it relates to WIOA and the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, your work there. So Judy, you want to kick us off?
Sure, sure. Thank you. So first I should clarify, I am with World Education Incorporated. Our great colleagues at World Education Services are a different organization. I think we're both Boston based, but they do great work and we do great work. And World Education Inc., as the name suggests, works across the world to promote equitable educational opportunities. Our focus in the US is really with adult learners, including and often primarily with English language learners who are themselves predominantly frontline workers. While the adult education system as a field is larger than the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, Title II, AFLA, the federal law, the federal funding, the accountability, performance accountability system, the policy that's inside of WIOA, inside the AFLA title, drives so much of what happens in adult education that we spend a lot of time doing WIOA technical assistance, some of it for the US Department of Education, much of it in local communities and with state offices. We do some policy and a great deal of advocacy. World Ed is also a member of the National Coalition for Literacy, as Emily noted, and the National Coalition is really deep into WIOA reimagining as members of Congress turn their attention to a potential 2022 reauthorization. So I'll share more on that later.
Great, thank you, Judy. Dane, would you like to go next?
You bet. Thanks, Emily, for having me this afternoon. And I saw the comment in the chat in response to the poll that we have a lot of work to do to get more employers. I see Tyson's. I don't know who number 2 is, but tell me who you are in the chat. I am curious to know. Unfortunately, Tyson Foods is a member, but I think we're making a lot of progress at BRT and getting more and more CEOs engaged in this issue, but more on that as we ensue the panel discussion. So for those of you that don't know who we are, the Business Roundtable is a CEO organization, which is, I think, an important distinction from other business-focused organizations. It is not the company that belongs, it is the CEO that is a member of the organization. Clearly, the CEO speaks not just on his behalf, but on the behalf of the company. But we really aim to engage those CEOs who, for the most part, represent Fortune 300 in the country. We are all US-based companies. And the breadth of our work really spans a number of issues. So it's not just education and workforce, which is a committee chaired by the CEO of GM, Mary Barra, who is now going to be the CEO of BRT in the next 2 years, starting January. But we also have immigration, chaired by Tim Cook, who couldn't be any more passionate about the immigration issues and more connecting them to the workforce issues. We have healthcare and tax and corporate governance, technology and some other issues, energy and other committees as well. I think probably one of the most exciting parts of the work as we think about the conversation we're going to have here today is how do we look at these issues around workforce and immigration by opening the lens even more? How do we connect it to some of the supply chain issues? How do we connect it to the growing automation and the impact that it's going to have on workers of all types? And then how does that, despite the structure we have on the Hill by committees, how do we influence some of these issues across multiple jurisdictional committees, not just Ed and Labor and Senate Health? So that's, I think, where we're leaning in more and more and using the voice of the CEOs to do that. So I'll stop there and you'll hear a little bit more from me as we go through the panel. But thanks again, Emily.
Thank you, Dane. And last but not least, Dan.
Thanks, Emily. And I'm not going to repeat the workings of the National Immigration Forum, but I will talk a little bit about our engagement around WIOA. And our engagement at the forum is a internal interdepartmental engagement. It involves congressional advocacy for WIOA reauthorization, which also includes providing recommendations to improve skills and workforce development programming for immigrants. And the National Immigration Forum also encourages corporations to consider ways that they can access federally funded workforce programs to better serve their immigrant workers, and also for them to engage around the whole WIOA reauthorization as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. And everyone, if you've been listening to other sessions, you've probably heard that immigrants represent the fastest growing segment of the workforce, according to the National Skills Coalition. By 2060, 20%, no, excuse me, by 2035, 20% of US workers will be immigrants. And then also through the forum's own research, earlier this year, we released a research paper called Room to Grow. And through that research shows that if you look at just the ratio of working age adults to retirees, we're not going to have adequate workers in the future, mainly due to declining birth rates and baby boomers retiring. And so through kind of looking at various analysis, we realize that we have to increase immigration levels by about 37%, which is about 370,000 by 2060, just to maintain the current ratio of working age adults to retirees. So we will share a link to that paper in the chat function if folks want to learn more, but that's part of the reason why we're having this discussion here is like, how can we better serve employers and how can we better serve immigrant workers? And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dane, actually, for our first question. I think most of us can agree that 2020 and 2021 have had a significant impact on the workforce and businesses. How, Dane, did your members at the BRT use workforce development resources to support the talent development needs for the changing business environment? And what challenges do they face in reaching out to state and local workforce agencies? Over to you, Dane.
Thanks, Emily. So with that question, do I have the rest of the time to answer? I'll try to be concise with respect to my fellow panelists. There are a couple of things I would say. And I want to start with, I'm going to get to WIOA, but let me first start where the conversation is focused today. And the conversation today is focused as we now shift from infrastructure to reconciliation, where we have, by my tallies, about $45 billion that is workforce focused. And I'm sure many of you have looked at the House bill as an example, but much of that, well, a lot of that money is directly WIOA focused. Some of it is Pell Grants, some of it is directed toward green jobs, if you will, under the climate provisions. But there's a lot of money in there directed toward programs that already exist in WIOA. And I think what we have to do once that bill passes is work with the Department of Labor and other relevant agencies to figure out not only how do we use those funds to ensure they're being responsive to meeting employers' demands, and yes, for jobs, but also for the knowledge and skills that are required. Because I think that's often where we end up excluding certain populations like immigrants because they don't have a bachelor's degree. So how do we not just ensure that individuals the money's being used in high demand fields or jobs, but that we're attaching that to the populations we're targeting? And to that point, it's really about, there's this argument we used to have with the last administration, that it was all about growing your own. And to Emily, your point and the numbers you pointed out, it is about growing your own plus recruiting and retaining and advancing a lot of other populations, including our immigrant populations. And we're not going to be able to do that on the employer side if we don't take a hard look at the HRIS systems and the human resource information systems. These are, as many of you may know, the systems that quite frankly and crudely spit people out because they don't have a bachelor's degree. And we have these algorithms that inherently have biases in them. And I think in particular about the work we're doing with Afghans resettling in the country, many of whom bring a body of knowledge and skills that should not be discounted because the companies haven't reviewed and revised the job descriptions about what they're looking for. And so the demand is so great with the 11 million jobs that are open. What we're trying to do is help companies look at the ecosystem of their HR system. And how does the HR system interact with the DE&I functions of the company? And how does it interact with other essential business units that will, quite frankly, expand the scope of who they consider the talent pool for the jobs that they're trying to fill? The last thing I would say, Emily, is we're really encouraged by news actually about an hour ago. You may have already known it, but I just heard about an hour ago that the Republicans now in the House have reopened bipartisan negotiations with the Democrats on WIOA reauthorization. That's encouraging. And we're going to do everything we can to try to say to both the Democrats and the Republicans, glad you're talking together, they're talking with one another, but let's think about the populations that you're trying to provide opportunities to, and not just opportunities for entry, but opportunities for, to use the terms of art that we're all using, how do we provide opportunities for upward mobility for all individuals that reside in this country, regardless of immigration status, regardless of whether or not they're long-term unemployed, short-term unemployed, and regardless of whether or not they have a bachelor's degree or some other credential or no credential. So those are some initial thoughts in response to your question.
Thank you, Dan. It was very helpful, and glad to see CEOs really leaning in on this and realizing that it's more about the skills rather than just those specific credentials. And because that's all what all of us are here is to upskill these workers. So you notice that many of the attendees for this webinar are actually adult education providers. And I'm sure they would appreciate hearing from you, how can adult education providers, such as technical education centers, get connected to and better work with employers in their area?
Is that to me or another panelist?
That's to you. Sorry, Dane.
Okay.
And then we're going to pivot to another panelist after you.
Okay. So I don't want to take all the airtime here. I'll be more succinct this time. So in the infrastructure package, I'm pretty sure there's $700 million focused on adult literacy. And we think that the adult learners, and this doesn't apply to all adult learners, but I think we have to do a couple of things. One is, how do we use that $700 to improve the foundational literacy skills of many of these individuals, some of whom have been impacted, the immigrant population by, and others by the pandemic. And we have not had any investment in adult literacy in this country for a long time, back to the first term of President Bush, and where he made a $1 billion investment. And I don't know if any of you have seen the report that the Barbara Bush Foundation recently released around adult literacy. I commend it, and what a national plan around adult literacy should look like. But adult training, I think, is, in addition to just making investments and focus on literacy, I think we also need to think about what are the opportunities, the other pathways where training can be provided. And one of those pathways is around career technical education. Some of us who are more mature remember it as voc ed. And how do we use those as avenues to not a pathway where, oh, you can't do the work in the 4-year school, but how do we make it more accessible, more affordable, more convenient to get to? And those are high wage, high skilled training jobs. And how do we see the career technical centers as a vehicle for for providing the training to the adult population. And then the last issue for the part of my response here around training adult learners is to think about the curriculum that companies could develop to provide training for individuals who may not even be, quite frankly, in entry-level jobs. And how do we take the assistant who's worked for X company for 15 years and provide her training that allows her, that gives her the recognition, or him, the recognition of the skills they've acquired over time, and giving them credit so that when they apply for the next best job with better pay, that they get, that those skills have been recognized. And we have companies like Humana and IBM that have built curriculum portals and assessments to help their employees evaluate the knowledge and skills they have and compare that to the gap, and look at the gap between the job they want, the next job they want within IBM, and what are the skills and how do they take advantage of those learning opportunities so that they can actually apply and be considered as a viable candidate for those jobs.
One quick follow-on questions, and I promise I'll move on to the next speaker. But tactically, like, what's the best way to get into with some of these employers? Is it through HR? Is it through corporate responsibility, learning and development folks? Like, if someone watching us right now is like, okay, how, because these companies you mentioned, the Fortune 300 companies, they're huge. So what's the best entree, do you think, for them to actually get an audience and educate the employer on what opportunities and partnership opportunities may exist?
First thing you have to do is say, you have a problem. You can't recruit and you're not retaining the people that you need in your companies. So like, here's your problem. I have a solution for you, but the people you really want to get to, I'm not evading, I'm not punting, but quite honestly, it depends on company to company. In some places, you're going to be able to go to the CSR person. You're going to have access to that person more quickly. And you need to make the argument with that individual to then connect to the other points. But I would say if you go to a Marriott, which is like, cannot find workers anywhere, go to the HR function. Go to the HR people. And that doesn't necessarily mean the chief human resource officers. They're critically important in our companies, but our companies have big HR operations. Find the entry point, within the talent and learning division office within the company. So I think it varies from company to company. And I have always offered our services. If you're trying to get in with someone who has a problem, like 95% of the time, I know who you can go to and would love to not only help you, but help our company solve their problem.
Great. Thank you so much, Dane. We're going to pivot now to Judy. I'm mute. At World Education Inc., you have access to work with and review programs all across the country. So I'm interested to see, what trends have you seen? What success stories can you share about onboarding and training for immigrant adult learners in virtual and hybrid environments?
Sure, thanks. I'm just putting a link to some research that we finished. I think the good news story of the pandemic for adult education may just have been that it was the disruptor that we needed to modernize. While all sectors of education had a really chaotic turn to emergency remote teaching and learning, adult educators across the country, we have seen step up. And that research that's linked there profiles a number of case studies of what we're calling remote ESOL, English for speakers of other languages, some really exemplar programs. I think now, what we really need as we turn back to our new normal, we need to turn our attention to accelerating rather than remediating, to putting the focus on things like competency-based high school equivalency programs, to invest in that integrated education and training, to recognize that training is important, but that kind of short-term terminal training that we used to offer to a lot of immigrants and refugees through our WIOA system, our WIA system, really didn't help them build skills for continued career and educational advancement. So we need more IET. We need to partner with employers and industry to bring education back into the workplace the way I know we've got Paul Germo sharing resources in the chat. And, we used to have a great federal investment in workplace adult education and literacy, workplace ESL, used to be called vocational ESL vessel programs. A lot of great work happened in that space and can happen in that space again. Adult learners are employees, they are parents, they are caregivers. Sort of that old classroom-based system had some real opportunity costs for participants who had to choose to use their precious limited time getting to and from a physical classroom happening at set hours. Programs have surveyed their learners, and learners are quite overwhelmingly voting to continue to, yes, have some in-person services, but continue those distance learning services post-pandemic, right? These options really open access, simultaneously build those academic and the technical skills. They break down geographic barriers to some of those best quality experiences. And to Dane's point about career tech ed, CTE, we've seen some really amazing investments happening in remote training for that kind of hard skill training as well. Colleges, community colleges using simulators and virtual reality platforms. That acceleration that many businesses have invested in during the pandemic to increase efficiency and effectiveness is really being mirrored in our education sector.
Thank you, Judy. So we're going to pivot talking a little bit more about WIOA specifically. In fact, I'm going to launch our next poll question. It's going to try to determine how familiar everyone is with WIOA. I bet I get 100%, but I'm curious to see. But WIOA recognizes that English language learners is critical population to be considered, which is very important. How can we strengthen programs at the work site to meet the needs of English language learners? For this question, I'm going to start with Dan, my colleague at the National Immigration Forum. Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, English language learning has seen some great advances and innovation in the last, I would say, decade or so. And I'm going to give one example, and that is one from the National Immigration Forum, which has developed what I would call a worksite contextualized hybrid English language learning model that we are calling English at Work. And English at Work supports limited English proficient employees to improve their job-related communication skills by providing instruction on relevant topics and competency, including job duties, team communication, problem solving, understanding and following safety guidelines, and using technology at work and interacting with customers and vendors. And all the language lessons are presented in the industry context and are reinforced using a highly dynamic approach. In addition, this hybrid course is designed to build participants' digital skills by delivering a technical module at the beginning of the course and reinforcing technology touchpoints throughout. Furthermore, the English at Work help desk supports team, provides proactive, individualized technical support to all learners from those that are just joining or onboarding to graduation. And some of the impact indicators, I think, from this program are quite remarkable. There's about 100% 30 and 60-day job retention rate for those participating in this, and a 94% retention at 1 year. There are about 89% of the managers reported increased store productivity, and there's an 87% improvement in English skills and 86% percent improved interaction with customers. There's about a 70 to 80% course retention rate, and 37% of the participants reported being promoted. So I think this is a key example of what more could be done. And one of the other things we think is that WIOA should be encouraging such innovation in English language learning, and that this could be done by updating the integrated English literacy and civics education programs statutory language to clarify program implementation requirements and to support a broader array of services to immigrants. So let me just stop there.
Great. Judy, is there anything you wanted to add, or do you want to move to the next question?
We can move to the next question. That was great.
Great, thank you. But thinking of WIOA again, and that it's up for reauthorization, what are ways that WIOA can support increased immigrant inclusion programs with businesses? What are some of the gaps that need to be addressed during the reauthorization process? Certainly with English language programs, but in other programs as well. Judy, would you like to take that first?
Sure. I'll say I think that WIOA, one of the things that we have to do is get to full WIOA implementation. We haven't really gotten to implement all of the sort of equity levers that were built into it. But there are definitely things that need to change. I mean, one of the things that I think is very positive, our employer voices are prioritized in WIOA state and local boards, right? At least 50% of the members are employers, but we need those employers to bring their immigrants as assets voices to the table, as Anson from Tyson is doing, right? The research is really clear. Immigrants are an economic engine for states and regions, but their voices aren't at most of those tables. We need employer voices calling out for investment in immigrant communities, specifically recruiting immigrants for career and training services, supporting workplace adult education, these new innovations, as Dan was pointing out, the apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship models. These are all allowable activities for the WIOA system. It's just, are we serving the right people with WIOA funds across the titles and leveraging each other's services, so that in adult education, we can leverage the training money that's inside individual training accounts under Title I. So there are a lot of things that we could strengthen to really help employers start to see WIOA Title II, see adult education as a key pipeline partner for them. I'd also flag that, one of the, I put a link to some of our WIOA recommendations earlier in the chat. One of the things I think we really have to do is strip out some of the deficit. WIOA uses a very deficit lens to talk about priority populations. And again, the intent is really solid. The intent is an equity strategy to put resources and attention to priority populations. But the term used in WIOA is individuals with barriers, right? And talks about basic skill deficient and low income. And it's long been, an adage that in public policy that programs for poor people are poor programs. Programs for those in need are always needy. So, there was a really interesting idea promoted actually by Kamala Harris in an earlier WIOA reauthorization conversation about making career and training services an entitlement for all American workers, right? An allotment of public investment at every set number of years for anyone to upskill, making upskilling a universal program. And that's, that was very revolutionary. Perhaps more realistic would be really operationalizing some of the things that are inside WIOA, like the statistical adjustment model that helps program providers, including adult educators, receive credit for serving people who need service the most, right? To make continuous improvement, not just about ratcheting up your performance measures, but serving highest priority populations in your community, whomever that might be. I think we also need incentives for co-enrollment between WIOA core programs and state plan partners, so that we can really leverage that expertise and funding for the comprehensive education training and other services inside career pathways.
Thank you, Judy. We have about 10 minutes, actually 9 minutes now left. Dan, did you want to add anything to that, or should we move to the next question?
Let's go to the next question. I think she covered that really well.
Go ahead.
Dan, you were going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So Dane, this actually next question is for you. As companies wrestle with hybrid and more flexible remote workplaces, how are the Business Roundtable members looking at long-term employee engagement, particularly with regards to immigrants and multilingual workforces? What role do you see for WIOA and other federal workforce development programs to support your members?
I mean, it's no secret with 11 million jobs, it's an employees market. And we've seen, maybe not specific to immigrants, or I'm not going to be able to provide some illustrative examples, but I will tell you the amount of flexibility that companies are responding to some of the wants, desires, demands in some cases of their workforce. And that doesn't just fit around remote work. That includes access to childcare. That includes opportunities for flex schedules so they can split their schedule and take advantage of a course or at the local community college or an adult literacy program. So I think more and more companies are taking that work on themselves. But to connect your question to the previous question, one of the reasons we don't have the employers, the large employers on these state and local workforce boards is because, and I've been at the agency side, and I know how this works in many states, they cut and paste the state plans from year to year. So I think employers would be engaged much more if we grounded how we spend the money at the state and local level in the data. What does the population look like? What are their educational needs? What are their aspirations? And I think that's how you get more employers engaged in the workforce system. And employers can't do it by themselves. The state can't do it by themselves. And I think we have some work to do in this era where we're going to have to be even more responsive to employees' needs. How do we use existing vehicles to do that for the immigrant population who have similar yet different needs? I mean, the childcare is not unique to immigrants. People need affordable, high quality childcare. And so how do we address that? Not just through WIOA. I mean, there's some provisions within WIOA that address childcare, but how do we tackle this in a much bigger way? And then the last thing I'll say, I cannot help but talk about H-1B dollars that always make their way over to the Department of Labor. And the last couple of years, those dollars have been used to expand apprenticeships. How do we use the apprenticeship dollars? And they came out of HB1 fees. How do we not use those for the dedicated fund to expanding apprenticeships for the immigrant population? And how do we couple that with the necessary wraparound services that are provided through WIOA so that people not just start, but they finish an apprenticeship program and they actually end up employed?
Great, thanks, Dane. I'm sure the earlier panel will appreciate your comments on apprenticeships. And Judy alluded to this in the chat a little bit. And I mean, one of the problems with the cut and paste and with WIOA is that it didn't really contemplate the need for digital literacy, which is so critical. That's been discussed throughout everyone's presentations today. So what are your thoughts about making foundation digital literacy core to WIOA and those other federal adult education workforce programs? So Judy, you want to start with this one first?
Sure, because that's easy. Yes, it's got to be in there, and it's got to be in our performance. Right now, WIOA just sort of includes digital literacy inside the workforce preparation definition and gives it to Title II to do, but it's not really something that the system measures or is rewarded for doing. So we have to change that. I did flag the Digital Equity Act is inside the infrastructure bill. States are going to be sitting down with planning monies sometime next year, I believe. Once they write those rules, and this conversation about supporting immigrant learners and workers, and in the 3 legs of digital equity in terms of access to high quality broadband, access to devices, access to digital literacy skills needs to be included in that state planning so that the funds can run and to the populations that need them. And I really hope that in WIOA reauthorization, we learn a lot from what's going to happen in at those state tables, and we build from it moving forward.
You can't do that though, unless you expand the list of eligible providers. So we've really got to take a look at through WIOA reauthorization, who can be considered an eligible provider, because that list is narrow, and we're not going to be able to provide the digital learning services without doing that.
Right, absolutely. And the Digital Equity Act has some lovely, they use the term community anchor institutions, much broader than what we have under WIOA, right? And covered populations, much more of an asset-based language than we have in WIOA.
Okay, so we're actually running low on time, but I've certainly got to ask this question for answering. I'm sure you'll probably be interested. But we're talking about integrated education and training programs. They're well known within Title II, but often overlooked in other core programs. So what types of incentives, performance metrics could be included to expand the benefits of IET? Judy, would you like to take this one first?
Yeah, I mean, IET is an evidence-based design and delivery model. We have really great research that shows that now currently in WIOA, it is embedded inside the IELCE program, as noted earlier. It needs to be lifted up. It needs to be lifted up across the titles. We need dedicated funding and co-enrollment structures to support it. It can't all rest inside the Title II, the AFLA language. And I think we need, IET is inside that our legislation because of all the work that practitioners did to build these innovative, accelerated learning models. Then once something shows up in federal law, people tend to say like, oh, it's there, we have to do it because WIOA says we do. And sort of an innovation chills. We need to continue to iterate on IETs and design and deliver new and effective models. So it's not something that is stagnated in the law.
Dan, did you want to add anything as well?
No, the only thing I guess I would add, and that is pretty technical in nature, but I mean, the one way to do this, to do what Judy just proposed, would be to include in the performance accountability system of WIOA, which is section 116, co-enrollment measures and targets for all titles of WIOA, and include within there things such as implementing ITE across all titles. So then if you put it in that particular section, I think it gives it far greater visibility than it currently has. I mean, I think other programs see it as a Title II program and figure, we don't need to worry about it. They're going to do it over at Title II, right? But that's not the case. Title I and IV would greatly benefit as well from this. So it needs to be somewhere where it has far greater visibility.
Completely agree. Well, with that, we are at 12:50. Does anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap up the panel? Okay, I want to thank the audience for joining us again for this past hour. I want to thank all my amazing panelists for the great discussion and for the perspective that each of you brought to this discussion. I think it was really great to have such a well-rounded presentation on this important topic. I want to refer back to Dr. Roark's comments when we first started the day about you need to tap into your superpowers, and we all need to be superheroes. It's going to take everyone involved in order to tackle the challenge. And so really appreciate everybody leaning in on this and really working to better serve both employers, and immigrant adult learners. So thank you all for your time today and hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks.